is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, Mrs May didn't even put that withdrawal agreement to the House of Commons, but we're now told she will in the week beginning the 14th of January. But the omen's not looking very good. One or two MPs have changed their minds, but still there's a big majority against it. And that means that two alternatives for Brexit become clearer. One is a second referendum, and goodness me, haven't we heard lots about that from the Chuckaramoonas and the Tony Blairs and many others. But the other option, which hasn't really been discussed all that much, I would suggest, in the country, is the idea that we leave, as per the legislation that's in place already, on March the 29th, on a WTO Brexit, a no-deal Brexit, a negotiated no-deal Brexit, call it what you will. And I did, the other Sunday, get into the studio, Shankar Singham, who is a trade lawyer, and he talked about, the changes that we'd need to make to ensure that actually it wasn't the great disaster that many have predicted. But what is interesting is that Jeremy Hunt, and I met him about 10 days ago, and, he said, look, we absolutely have to deliver to the British people, and if that means we can't get Mrs May's deal through, if it means a no-deal Brexit, that's where we have to go. So suddenly this is being, at least on the face of it, taken seriously. Here today was Brexit Secretary Steve Barclay talking to Sky News about a no-deal Brexit and its effect on businesses.
The government's priority is to secure a deal. That hasn't changed. But alongside that, as part of our continuation of preparing for no deal, a responsible government needs to ensure that we are ready for that default option, which we don't want to happen, but we're ready in the event that it did happen. That's why at Cabinet today we agreed that preparing for no deal will be an operational priority within government, but our overall priority remains to secure a deal. We're sending a clear message that this needs to be much more of a priority for businesses up and down the country. The government's priority remains to secure a deal, but we need to recognise with 14 weeks to go that a responsible government is preparing for the eventuality that we leave without a deal. That is the responsible thing for the government to do. That is what we agreed at Cabinet, and over the coming weeks you will see a significant increase in the communications to businesses to ensure that the technical notices that we put out in the summer, the notices we have put out since, actually get the traction with the business community that we need to see so that they are planning in the event that no deal were to occur.
So that's Brexit Secretary Steve Barclay, and he's saying, look, we're going to be emailing businesses, writing to businesses. I wonder if you're a business, whether you feel at the moment you've been left somewhat in the lurch. And he's saying, operationally, more money is going to go into preparing for a no-deal Brexit, but of course it's still not his top priority. So I wouldn't exactly say he sounded wildly enthusiastic about a negotiated no-deal, and nor did the Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson. He was asked a question today by Conservative MP Will Quince, who resigned a junior ministerial post over his objections to Mrs May's deal, and here was Gavin Williamson talking about his department and the contingencies that he's preparing.
Mr Speaker, the Modernising Defence Programme in part is about improving the resilience of our defence and our country. Could the Secretary of State confirm if he has had any approaches from other government departments about using our world-class armed forces personnel in the event of a no-deal Brexit?
We've as yet not had any formal requests from any government department, but what we are doing is putting contingency plans in place, and what we will do is have 3,500 service personnel held at readiness, including regulars and reserves, in order to support any government department on any contingencies they may need.
So there we are. We may need 3,500 troops in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Again, it's a government talking about it, but not with a great degree of enthusiasm. But it is now being talked about. Money and resources are being put into this option. And it's led to a pretty extraordinary response from the European Parliament's chief negotiator, Guy Verhofstadt, who said today, those like Jeremy Hunt, who glorify a no-deal Brexit, are totally irresponsible. It is not the job of politicians to make the people they lead poorer, remove opportunities, rights, and make their lives more uncertain. There is no such thing as a managed no deal, so he is not very happy at all. All of which, as if this does become now more of a possibility, makes me ask the question, who has more to lose from a no-deal Brexit? Is it us, or is it the European Union? If you think we're the ones with a problem, call 0345 6060 973, or maybe you think actually the European Union had never ever thought this could ever happen and they're the ones that are going to be worried, then please text to 84850. And again I say, if you're a business and you're concerned about this, do you think you're getting the right level of leadership from our government on the issue? And please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. I would just say this from the EU side, because we haven't talked about this much, that no deal has never been seen as a realistic option by the European Union. Indeed, when the Prime Minister occasionally said no deal is better than a bad deal, nobody over there ever really believed her, and that maybe is why Mr Verhofstadt is as angry as he is today. Let's be clear, the European Union would hate Britain to leave on a negotiated no deal. Why? Well, number one, they wouldn't get their 39 billion, and that would not please them at all. Number two, they would come under huge pressure from the car manufacturers, the wine producers, who of course would find their products potentially with tariff if they're selling goods into the UK. But here's the real reason. The real reason why a no-deal Brexit is a horror story for the European Union is we will be outside the rules of the single market and the customs union and free to become competitive. It's the one thing Mr Barnier did not want from day one, did his best to keep us inside that customs union, and I think he felt with the withdrawal agreement that he'd got where he needed to be. And I remember having a conversation with a guy called Hans-Olaf Henkel. He's a German MEP, and he's the former boss of the German equivalent of the CBI. He said, Nigel, what will you do with British businesses once you've got Brexit? I said, well, we'll become competitive. We'll have different laws and rules to all the rest of you. He said, but this can't be allowed to happen. I mean, if you did that, Germany would have to leave. The whole thing would collapse. I said, well, yes, that's the point. So the EU do not like the idea of a no-deal Brexit, and there are many in Britain that don't like the idea of a no-deal Brexit. And I'd be the first to admit that our government, I think, is pretty ill prepared for it. But I believe that that given where we are, it's perhaps the only way we can deliver what people voted for in a referendum and backed it up in a general election. And if there are a few short-term bumps in the road, hey, we'll be free to do our own thing. I think the European Union has more to lose from this than we do. That is my view. You tell me what yours is. 0345 6060 973. Adam in Westminster is my first caller. Good evening, Adam.
Good evening, Nigel.
Welcome. So Mr Verhofstadt did not sound very happy about this prospect, did he?
I couldn't care less. What he feels happy or not about, it's not my problem. Listen, at the end of the day, it's not the European Union, Nigel, it's the bullying union, as we all know. They don't like to negotiate, they like to dictate. It's a dictatorship. And incidentally, you talked about Chuka Umunna, Tony Blair's, Yvette Cooper's, and Anna Soubry's, and all these Ramonas. They should have a referendum amongst themselves to see who is the biggest Ramona, because I would be fascinated about that. And as to the fact of whether or not we're going to have... I don't like the idea of a no-deal Brexit, Nigel. I want to make one thing very clear. I absolutely love it. I can't wait.
Right.
Can't wait.
And why, Adam? Tell me why you want it so much.
Because how can I describe this? I mean, when I was a child, Nigel, I got my first bicycle when I was about 5 years old. And you know the type of bike. It's got the two stabilising wheels either side of the back wheel.
I remember, yeah.
I couldn't wait to get rid of those. And you know why, Nigel? Because it set me free. And that's a similar analogy which I would like to use about this bullying club in Europe. How dare they try to stop us from breaking free? And the idea of a no-deal Brexit, this government, they should be careful what they wish for. They talk about making this kind of planning now at such a late stage, because what they're trying to do is bully the MPs into submission, hoping that they'll take this.
Well, yeah. I mean, Adam, isn't the truth of all of this that what she's trying to do is she's trying to bully her own MPs into accepting her deal on January the 14th or around about that date, and with Brussels, she wants to be seen to be tough with Brussels so that they give way on the backstop. That's what's really going on here, isn't it?
Couldn't agree with you more, Nigel. And incidentally, she's probably taken bullying lessons from Juncker & Co.
I think she's a long way behind them on those stakes, I have to say. Adam, a lot of passion there. Chris is a new caller from Leicester. Chris, who has more to lose from a no-deal Brexit?
I think it's the EU. I think people will argue in the short term that there's stuff to lose on both sides. So I don't for 1 minute think that it won't be without its hiccups and bumps. But in the long term, the point being here, it's all about the EU are worried, and they've been worried since day one. And they had an opportunity when Cameron went over and said, "Look, let's reform this." They slapped him in the face and sent him home.
They did.
Right? That was one of the defining moments that made me say, "Do you know what? If you aren't willing to negotiate, then I'm not willing to be a member, because I cannot be dictated to." And that's what they were doing, and they've been doing it all the way through. And it's only now that I've begun to get a little bit of hope that we actually might see a no-deal Brexit come to fruition.
Chris, to tell you what, the last 48 hours there's been more talk about this, and I've met a couple of Tories yesterday who think, this is the most likely outcome now. I still don't believe it, because to get
Can I just say one thing, Nigel, on this?
You do.
Because the thing with... I was actually worried last week that, hold on, this second referendum and all the rest of it and going on, and you're thinking to yourself, well, how... Let's put this into plain text. How the hell can we have a second referendum? Because nobody asked for that, right? We had one. It gave us an answer to a question. How a second referendum basically is a slap in the face to democracy.
Oh, Chris,
right?
look. By the way, I'm not an enthusiast for it at all. I hope it doesn't happen. I think it would have a very, very damaging effect on this country. But hey, it's still one of the distinct possibilities. Chris, thank you. Well, a couple of callers there who were not scared of a no-deal Brexit, who think the European Union has got more to lose. I agree with that. Please tell me I have got it all wrong. Tell me a no-deal Brexit would be a catastrophe. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:15 and time for the news. Well, the government says they're stepping up plans to prepare for a no-deal Brexit, and they will start to connect with businesses around the country, telling them what they need to be thinking. And amidst that, of course, we see some quite dire warnings from a Defence Secretary that as many as 3,500 troops may have to be mobilised and put on the streets in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Another twist to this is, just imagine we get to January, the deal can't go through, there is complete parliamentary gridlock. One of the options, and I have been talking about it over the last few months, is the possibility the government says we can't sort this out, we've got to go to the European Council and ask for an extension of Article 50, and the government overnight got some legal advice back on that to say that yes, of course they could extend Article 50, but if they extended it beyond the 2nd of July, which is the day the new European Parliament will take its seats, they couldn't do so without the United Kingdom contesting the European elections, and that would be on May the 23rd. And I can't imagine that Prime Minister May would want a European election to be contested at this time. So that option of extending Article 50 brings with it some other big potential political difficulties. So who's got more to lose? Because remember, the Governor of the Bank of England and others have been telling us that to leave on a no-deal Brexit would be a disaster, a catastrophe, huge falls of our potential GDP growth. Who's got more to lose, us or them? I'm going to Frankfurt to speak to Christine, a new caller to this show. Good evening, Christine.
Good evening, Nigel.
Welcome. So, how does it look from Germany, Christine?
From Germany, well, if you lived in Germany and you wanted a good cup of tea, you'd have to bring it from England. Everything you want from England, anything English, you'd have to bring it in your car. Right. When I watch the adverts on ITV for all these German products, it's not just the car industry. There is so many German products in England that I notice that probably everyday English people don't realise. It's just amazing how they've took over the supermarkets and, lots of things. And there's nothing here, absolutely nothing. You can get Irish cheese or butter, but that's it. They
So,
don't
Christine-
buy anything from us.
So, Christine, and you're quite right, it's the cars, it's supermarket chains, it's all sorts of garden products and all. I mean, they are a phenomenal manufacturing nation, the Germans, there's no question about that. So, really, if we leave on no deal, and if British industry was able to undercut in competitive terms the rule book, and there were tariffs on German goods, there'd be a lot of unhappy German people, Christine, wouldn't there?
Well, there'll be a lot of people who are probably unemployed as well. I
Yes.
mean, just in, a small contractor in Germany that are selling their products to England, they can't afford to lose a UK contract. That is just unthinkable for them. I mean, just like the shampoo, Dr. Oetker, Müller, all these things, and Haribo, they're all over there, and they've grabbed all that market. And our English stuff, what we used to sell, seems to have disappeared.
Well, we have a massive trade imbalance. I mean, I think the annual trade imbalance with Germany alone, Christine, is over £30 billion. So
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. So is the message then that really Angela Merkel ought to be saying, why don't we all grow up and come to a sensible free trade deal?
Well, I'm not quite sure if they're saying anything, because the way that those people in Brussels are talking, they're so arrogant. When you're watching on TV, it just drives you nuts, the arrogancy of them.
Do you know what,
and
Christine?
it makes you wonder whether they're even listening to any or representing any of the 27 countries.
Absolutely. And here's the point. In these negotiations, the European Union have represented themselves, not European companies and European workers. Christine, very good point about the extent to which we buy German products and we even now shop in their shops. Peter in Cambridge is another new caller. Good evening, Peter.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
I am well. So who's got most to lose from a no-deal Brexit, Peter?
To be honest, I think it's pretty much an even balance, but I think it's going to affect sort of certain industries more than others, obviously. So it's probably more of an even keel. But there are parts of UK industry that will suffer quite a lot, and other parts that maybe they might benefit. But I work for a global organisation, and we trade a lot with Europe. Tens of millions into Europe in manufacturing equipment.
Yeah,
and I'm an accountant, and I'm a finance manager for Germany and the Netherlands. So there's some slight concern for me in my role, because we have a special arrangement whereby we can run the German channel's books from the UK. Post Brexit, obviously that becomes a little bit unsure for me. So,
do you feel, Peter, as somebody working in a business like that, do you feel you've had much guidance from our government on what the likely outcomes are?
No, not at all. I mean, it's anyone guess, really, to be honest. I don't think anyone really knows. We have a Brexit committee, and they've done a lot of analysis into the worst case scenario and what the costs might be. And they came to the conclusion that a no-deal Brexit would cost the business around $4 million a year in tariffs and other barriers to trade. So,
tariffs. I mean, I guess the one argument about tariffs, Peter, is that if sterling was to fall on the back of it, you would compensate for those tariffs.
Sure.
But
yeah,
what would you rather, Peter? Tell me, as somebody involved in a cross-border business and lots with Europe, what would you like to see happen from here?
I mean, I voted Remain, and I'm not a fanatical Remainer. Both sides, people from both sides annoy me a little bit with how extreme they can be in their views. I think we have to go with the vote, and my preferable outcome would be to come to a deal.
Come to a free trade deal, basically.
To have some sort of deal, so we can satisfy both sides. Because at the end of the day, it was a close vote, and it was the biggest democratic exercise in history, possibly. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's probably the second most amount of votes anyone ever voted for was to Remain. So I think to cancel it or to no deal would be a betrayal to millions of people one side or the other. So.
Peter, I'm a fanatical leaver, as you well know, and I've always wanted a simple free trade deal. But the problem is the time is running out for that, and that's why the no deal option is being discussed. Peter, great call, very interesting, thank you. Why no mention that 226,000 people have already signed a petition to go for no deal? I haven't mentioned the petition, but I'm watching it every day. There are lots of petitions out there. This one, as I say, I'm watching it. Maybe it'll go to a very big number, but kind of petitions and marches, I'm not sure they achieve all that much. I wish in many ways they did. Chris says both sides have a lot to lose without a deal, but the EU have got more to lose. Otherwise, you might see Italy, Poland and others jumping out of the Union too. Well, that's part of their negotiating tactics, isn't it? Stuart is calling from Lockley in Hampshire, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Stuart.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well. So are you fearful of what a no-deal Brexit will do to the UK, Stuart?
Oh, God, no. I'm delighted. I made Nigel, I don't know where to start on this, but I made this country my home 23 years ago. I came over from the colonies, and it's been very, very good to me. I'm married to a wonderful English girl, etc., etc. But I used to work in the financial markets. I've got half a brain. I know how the economy works. I could never understand the euro and how you could shoehorn the Southern Europeans and the Western Europeans and the Northern Europeans into a currency like that.
Well, it's not working, Stuart, is it?
Well, it's a busted flush. I mean, look at what happened to Ireland with the tiger economy. Greece is a modern-day, I won't say the word, but Donald Trump used it. It's a tragedy. I was in Greece in April. There are riots in the streets. Paris is burning. When the Italian banks go down, the euro will go down. If you want to have a referendum in Catalonia, you get 30 years sedition. The place is, it's gone mad. It's mad. We are so much better off out of it and watching it.
Well, Stuart, I've always taken that view. And do you think, just finally, Stuart, do you think that a no-deal Brexit is going to have political ramifications across Europe, particularly in Germany?
Well, my very strong view, Nigel, is that the Germans are running Europe. If it wasn't for the euro, the Deutschmark would be so strong,
through the
strong,
roof.
None of us would be able to afford a Volkswagen, let alone a Porsche. So I feel so strongly about this that I've joined an organisation you may have heard of called Leave Means Leave.
I have heard of it, yes.
Yeah. So I'm not a politician. I'm a pragmatic punter. And I've been bombarding our good friends at the Telegraph every day with up to 2 or 3 letters, none of which have been published, which is fine. But I've been sending them to your good selves, Mr. Longworth and yourself, at Leave Means Leave.
Okay.
And the delicious irony of all of this, Nigel, is I was looking. The Germans should be being fined 1% of their GDP every year for exceeding the trade balance rules. They've done it for a decade, but the EU won't fine them.
No.
I read it. The delicious irony of all of this is I found an article that slagged this whole thing off in The Guardian, written on the 8th of April by a guy called Larry Elliott. And he sets out very clearly what the problems are, and the deck is stacked against Britain by the Germans and the EU. So
and here's our chance, Stuart, to break free. Stuart, I've got to go. Love the call, love the passion. This is the Nigel Farage Show. It's 6:30 and time for the news with Lisa Aziz. The government is stepping up plans for a no-deal Brexit. Most of all, I think, to try and frighten MPs into supporting her deal next month when it comes to the House of Commons, and hopefully to try and threaten, from her perspective, those in the European Union to change the rules on the backstop. But it's a valid debate. We are now at last talking about leaving on WTO terms. We've been told terrible things would happen. No medicines would come in, the planes wouldn't fly, we could be starving. All of it, of course, is nonsense, because no government would allow that to happen. It would be actually a criminal act for the government not to allow EU medicines to come into our country. Now, the switchboard here is going like a Belisha beacon, so let's get straight back to the callers. John in Southampton is a new caller. John, who's got most to lose?
I think they have, actually, Nigel.
Mm-hmm. Tell me why.
Well, I feel that we have been all misled, and particularly by the senior civil service, and also the chief ministers. They seem to have not listened to anybody, the rank and file, and I think the civil service have been in league with the EU since day one. In fact, all our local county councils have had plans in their offices to show how the EU would divvy up or divide our country. So we'd lose all our counties, we'd lose our traditions, and we'd be Europeans. I mean, that's my feeling about the whole thing. We've been totally misled.
Well, John, John, the whole thing is about the creation of a United States of Europe with its own army, its own foreign policy. I mean, that's what it's about. And why those on the Remain side deny this so often, I do not know. John, your comments on the civil service, I have to say, I did call them a couple of months back the enemy within, and I got quite roundly condemned in some of the newspapers for saying that. But it's basically, John, it's collusion. We have got the civil service, Tony Blair and others, colluding with the European Union against the referendum result of our country. The whole thing's a disgrace. If we leave on WTO terms, John, we could be a bit poorer, though. Possibly, that's what we're told.
No. I think if we leave, we will save the money we're going to pay the EU.
Yep.
And I think we will actually all prosper. I think food prices, as people have rightly, will come back down. I mean, I remember when we joined the EU, I used to go on long weekend breaks to France. And as soon as they changed from the franc to the euro, in fact, things doubled in price.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. John, thank you very much indeed. John, they're very optimistic about what we can do if we have a clean Brexit, which is one way of describing WTO. The other side of the argument say that it would be a catastrophe, but there's no doubt people in Europe are worried about this too. Mark says, so that's it, is it? We won't get German sausages, chocolate, cars or French wine. That's hardly starving, is it? Jeff says, if we don't do a deal, the EU is done for. There's lots at stake for them too. Well, there certainly is, Jeff. And the one thing they do not want, or Brussels doesn't want, is for us to leave and to be seen 2 years on prospering and doing well, because they know then lots of others will look for the exit door. Lee in Durham is a new caller. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Nigel. How are we doing?
Welcome. Well, I some days think we're doing okay, Lee, but I just wonder whether this government really would have the courage to go down this route. But hey, if they did, who's got most to lose?
Oh, the European Union, without a shadow of a doubt, Nigel. Without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, I'm in the building game, and I've probably got £100,000 worth of German rendering machines. Can I mention any of the names or not? No,
I don't think you better, really. No.
No. Yeah, but a vast array of machines, and all that comes over from Germany. It's good product. So that, along with all the cars and the wines and whatever else, they've got far more to lose than what we have. And I hope this government has the bottle to take them all away personally, and see how it goes from there. And also, I want to thank yourself for campaigning tirelessly to get us to this point. Because it's because of people like you, we are getting close to leaving the European Union.
Well, let's cross everything. And Lee, the truth is, if those German machines came in that you use, and if they attracted a tariff of a few percent, you'd still buy them anyway, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, it's what you need to do the job, and in order to do the job, you've got to have the best machinery. So, I'm sure if they put a tariff on, we can put a tariff on.
Well,
you say. We can just have a free trade deal. I mean, it makes sense to everybody. At the end of the day, like you've always said, we're still part of Europe. We're not leaving Europe. We just don't want to be part of this monopoly of a union where it doesn't... I've always believed we are the odd sock in Europe, and it doesn't totally work for us.
I've always felt that, Lee. I've always felt that. I felt that for 25 years. Lee, thank you. And the point here is, folks, Lee will go on buying those machines, even if we are trading with Germany on WTO terms. At the end of the day, consumers buy products because they think it's the right price and it's got the right degree of reliability. Yes, free trade makes things easier, but, most of the trade done in the world is done on WTO terms. We can't say that often enough. Let's go to Middlesex and speak to Peter in Heston, a new caller. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you for speaking to me. On the subject of will the EU suffer or will we suffer, I think that the EU will suffer more than we will, and I think that in the long term they are looking into real trouble. I agree with Professor Jordan Peterson of Toronto University, that the institution is too big to succeed. Not too big to fail, but too big to succeed. And I think you've used the expression about us leaving being the first brick of the wall to go. I think that is essentially what will happen. And I do agree with the WTO thing. I remember some months ago pointing out to a brother-in-law of mine who now lives in Australia that I grew up on Australian butter and
New Zealand lamb,
which you did.
Yes, absolutely. I'm old enough. Yes, absolutely. Right. So you're not fearful at all. Basically, Peter, we break free.
No.
We do well. It's the end of the European Union.
I think your point a few minutes ago about possibly poorer, which hits, I think, the point made by the Remainers. They say nobody voted to be poorer, but that wasn't a debate at all. The point was, are we in an institution, not whether we're in it for good or for evil, but are we in the institution? And a majority voted to leave that institution, and I think that's ultimately the bottom line. The bottom
and 39
line
billion, Peter. 39 billion is a very good featherbed to begin with, isn't it?
Well, I don't know how much that is. I mean, I think of my money in pounds and new pennies, basically. So I know I think a billion.
Do you know what?
It looks like.
Do you know what, Peter? You've just said something that is so true. How many people can really get their head around billions and hundreds of billions and trillions? Very, very few. Peter, I thank you for your call. Now, Karen says something here, which I've been hearing over the last couple of days. She says, has it ever occurred to you that Theresa May is deliberately dragging this out since her return from Brussels in order to have a no-deal Brexit? Hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned. Good honour, I say. Karen, a couple of people have put this to me, that actually, Nigel, you've got it all wrong. Theresa May's playing a brilliant game here. She's now decided to drag this out as long as she can so that we leave on WTO terms with a negotiated no deal on March the 29th. If that's right, then there'll be no doubt in my mind that empty fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square is where she should finish up. But Karen, I just don't believe it. And I look at her, I look at 2/3 of the cabinet, and they are establishment Remainers. I hope I'm completely wrong. I hope they continue down this path. But I tell you what, I'll believe it when I see it. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:45 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. The campaign against us leaving on World Trade Organization rules has been absolutely relentless. Words like catastrophe, disaster, will all be poorer, medicines will run out, drinking water, we were told the other week, there might not be enough drinking water. And they really have done their best to try and rubbish this concept completely. It doesn't seem to be working with all of you. And Steve puts a seasonal twist to it and says, hello, Nigel, WTO will be like Christmas dinner. Push the Brussels to one side and enjoy the rest. Yeah, okay, Steve. So far, in answer to the question, who would be hurt more by us moving to WTO, the European Union has been your conclusion. If you think it's Britain, please call 0345 6060 973. And lots of callers coming in from Europe too. Ian lives in the High Alps in France and is a new caller to the show. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening. Honoured to meet you. Well, to hear.
So you're living high up in the snowy Alps, are you?
Yes, we got all the snow, yep.
Good. So, Ian, now France, of course, sells a lot of product into this country, has a positive trade surplus with us. Could they be potentially hurt if tariffs start getting put on their goods?
Definitely.
Okay.
Things are not good in France. With the Gilets jaunes, the yellow jackets, Macron, I remember just a few weeks ago, he was criticising Salvini in Italy because of their budget. It went against EU rules. And now he's complaining, he's being complained about by the EU because he's going to have to stump up around 8 to 9 billion to pay for to pay off the yellow jackets.
Which it looks like will take France through the 3% as well, doesn't it? Yeah, I know.
Yeah. No, I tell you what, France is not really healthy. So it's a delusion. I was speaking to a guy yesterday. He said it's a bit like a hologram. It doesn't really. he talks about the EU army. Yeah, they did well in the Balkans, didn't they? You know, they just observed the problems that went on, and the Americans and English came in and sorted it out. You know, the people who are Remainers are deluded, really. Deluded.
So
they
Ian,
should see what life is really like.
Despite the fact you live in France, you think Britain just should get the hell out by
I
whatever
love France.
means.
I'm not anti-European. I love France. I just hate the EU.
Okay, well, do you know what? I'm in that camp as well, Ian. Thank you very much. Enjoy the snow. I'm going to go to Edinburgh and speak to Mike, who's a new caller. Evening, Mike.
Hi, good evening. Hi, John.
Good evening. So, WTO Brexit is being talked about. Does that worry you?
It does worry me a bit. I think that my intent for calling was really the fact that the EU has quite a lot to lose here, and that therefore, because of that, I think that they'll be quite aggressive in trying to punish the UK for leaving. And as a result of that, I fear that the UK might lose more than the EU, at least in the short term, because they might be they really just won't want to let it go. And if you start seeing countries leave and prosper, it's just going to start unraveling the whole thing. And so they really have a massive incentive for just making it as difficult as possible.
In a sense, Mike, don't you think the withdrawal agreement was in a way their punishment for us?
Sorry, could you repeat that? So
I'm saying, don't you think that the withdrawal agreement, in a way, that was our punishment because it was designed to keep us wrapped inside EU rules, so that we couldn't break away and prosper?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that the deal that Mrs. May has is probably something that's kind of in between, and that it does try to have some sort of trade agreement in there, but then it does have that sort of, if things seem to go slightly too well for the UK, then you can sort of start pulling that thing and maybe make it a bit harsher. So in that way, maybe the WTO might be the sort of the better option, and that it's kind of that thing that just breaks everything clean. But they might still make it fairly difficult for the UK, I fear, and I think that might be why UK might suffer a bit more than the EU.
Yeah, Mike, I wouldn't underestimate what they might do in any circumstance one bit. Mike, I thank you for your call. Loads of calls. John from Blackpool is a new caller. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Nigel. Thanks for taking my call.
Not a bit. So how do you see it?
I wanted to just explain. I know you like fishermen, so if we come out, we get our fishing waters back, our fishing rights.
Yes.
And we put, if there's 10, you get, for every fisherman that goes to sea, there's 7 men get a job on shore. Because if you've got 10,000 men going to sea, you've got 70,000 on shore. Blacksmiths, welders, net makers, rope walks, all sorts of stuff, people that need to back you up while you're at sea. And there'd be a lot of shipbuilding going on because we don't have enough ships at the moment. But what we could do is it's frightening France to death. This because
remember, John, the ink wasn't even dry on the withdrawal agreement when Macron was saying, we will make sure that we continue to get access to British waters. Do you remember?
I do, yes. But he's got 100,000 people on shore working, and they lose their jobs straight away because it'll come over to us. But you can let some of the European fleets fish, but they have to land their fish in English ports.
So we can get something
out of it.
So we can get the processing. You mean? So we can get the processing side of it, John? Yeah.
Well, as long as they land it, onto the quayside, they can put it in wagons and take it wherever they want. But at least we'll get something out of it. At the moment, we get nothing.
So WTO Brexit means we leave cleanly, we get our fishing waters back. That's a big benefit. John, great point. Thank you. I'm running on. I've got so many of you that want to have your say. Tony in Orpington is a new caller. Hi, Tony.
Oh, hi, Nigel.
Welcome to the show. So tell me,
thank you.
It's a horrible conversation, really, who gets hurt most, but who's got most to lose in the short term?
For me, I'm pro-Brexit all the way, but then again, so I'd say the UK would lose out the most if we had a no deal and went out of the EU completely. And
Right.
I just want to say, it's not directed to you personally, but I just think everyone calls in and it's the same old, same old. You don't really speak to a lot of people who have the opposite view, and I think, I just think that's not a bit fair.
Do you know, Tony? Do you know, Tony? On Sunday, I had a lot of people with entirely opposing views, and I welcome it. And I've appealed. I'm happy to get both sides of an argument. But I think what is interesting, Tony, is this: despite all the demonisation of leaving on WTO rules, there does appear to be a lot of people out there who are actually openly enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, no, I get that. And what annoys me, I respect everyone's opinion for the vote. I don't disrespect people who voted to leave the EU, but and I just don't like when all these callers call us Ramonas and say we're deluded. I think that's really unfair, to be fair.
Well, there's a lot of nasty stuff said both ways, Tony, isn't there?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I understand that. And so I just wanted to say that. So, I know I might not be making my point really well right now, but I just wanted to say that. That's all. But I like listening to the show when I can get there. But I just like people to just respect people who voted to remain, and that's all really. And I don't really hear that. But then again, that might be because I'm not listening all the time and hearing that.
Well, Tony, I think
being unfair here.
I think the trouble is that Remain is so represented by people like Lord Adonis, Alistair Campbell, Sir Nick Clegg and Tony Blair that perhaps it gives Remainers a bad name. But Tony, you make a fair point. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ken in Frankfurt is a new caller. Ken, you've got 35 seconds. We're running out of time. Please make your point. Who's going to get hurt most?
My point, Nigel, is I think Britain will overall be better off in the long run outside of Europe, because I think there are things going on that we don't know about yet, and they will slowly come up year on year. It will cost more money. I'm a news photographer. I travel all over Europe, and I see all sorts of different angles and talk to all sorts of different people. And there are a great many millions of people who are fed up with the EU.
Yes. No, that absolutely. It's got problems everywhere. Ken, I thank you very much. Ken, I thank you. I thank everybody for calling in. Literally so many calls. We could have gone on for hours. Quick final thought from me. All of these arguments about moving to WTO rules are couched in economic terms, never in political terms. Politically, the EU will lose far more than we will, because we will have shown that a country can leave the European Union and others will want to follow. I'll be back tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick. But up next, it's Ian Dale.
Nigel, thank you very much. We're coming up on the show a little later at 8 o'clock. Tracy Crouch, the former sports minister, you may remember she resigned over fixed odds betting terminal. She's going to be coming into the studio for an hour to take your calls. Lots to talk about to her. I think she's quite keen to talk about Jose Mourinho, can you believe it? Being sacked as Manchester United manager. I have little sympathy with him, I have to say, the unspecial one. At 9 o'clock, we're going to be talking about, look, I know it's a difficult subject, but we are going to talk about suicide, because on Saturday night I had a call from someone about to